Hey fellow patriots, Rick Green here with today's Constitutional Minute, and our focus is going to be on the Constitution and what it has to say about the presidential election. I'm sure nobody's paying attention to that or thinking about that, but yeah, we need to talk about not Trump or Biden, but the Constitution and the rule of law. That's what we're going to talk about. And I think something that all law-abiding Americans should be able to agree on is that we want free, fair, accurate elections. But to do that, you got to have three things. They're absolutely essential, and this is going to drive our conversation today. These three things are, number one, it's absolutely essential to have transparency. Secondly, it's absolutely essential to have verification of the ballots and the counts. And then third, absolutely essential to have remedies for violations, remedies when the rule of law has been broken. That's why these lawsuits are important. So transparency, verification, and then remedies for violations. Here's what we know. Our politics in America it's toxic right now, folks. It is nasty. It's not the first time in history, believe me. This is not that different from many elections we could talk about throughout our history, but it's bad. And the best disinfectant for that toxicity is sunlight. Bill Bennett used to say it all the time. The best disinfectant is sunlight. That transparency is what will almost be like a balm to help heal our nation. But it's absolutely critical we have that transparency, and it's necessary for an election to be trusted by the people. If you don't have the transparency, the verification, and the remedies, nobody's going to trust the outcome. Or at least the losing side certainly not going to trust the outcome. And even we're seeing in the polling now that some of the winning side is saying we're not so sure we won legally, but hey, we won. Here's the thing. When you prevent transparency, when you're hiding your actions, first of all, odds are you're probably up to no good. But even if you aren't cheating, it's impossible to convince the other side of your good intentions and the fact that you weren't cheating. You just don't do things in secret if you want everybody to trust the outcome. So let me just give you three quick examples from history to understand how important this is and how when you have all three of those things, transparency, verification, and remedies, then you get that balming effect. Both sides come together when it's all said and done and say we're fellow Americans or fellow, in my case, Texans, and after a hard-fought election, we can both believe, even though it was close, we can believe in the outcome. First example is my own race in 1998. I've got some personal experience with these recounts. 1998, I ran for the legislature. I lost by 20 votes out of 30,000, so very, very small margin out of the 30,000. We had a recount. My opponent and I looked at every single one of those 30,000 ballots, either us or someone on our team, but we both had somebody there for every single ballot. Total transparency. By the end of the recount, I had picked up 56 votes. I win the election. My opponent, by law, could have asked for another recount, and he didn't. He said, Rick, you won. We both looked at every single ballot. Transparency. We had verification, and as a result, there were the remedies. I had the legal request for the recount. He had the opportunity to do a legal request for another recount. So we had all three things: transparency, verification, and remedies. And as a result, nobody said the other guy cheated to win the race. Nobody lost faith in the election process. We actually had more faith in the process. That's what happens when you have all three. 2 years later, that was 1998. 2 years later, big national election, presidential race, Bush v. Gore. Comes down to Florida. About 1,000 votes separate the two candidates after the first count. And so there's a recount. So we have a transparent process where everybody's there watching. There are legal remedies. Both sides are going to state court, going to federal court, trying to make sure the law is followed. Nobody got up and declared that it was all over. The media didn't coronate anybody. Everybody stepped back, and it took 37, 38 days for that to take place. So we didn't know until, early, almost mid-December, who the president was going to be. I happened to be in the House chamber when President Bush finally accepted and was declared the victor in that race. I was in the room when it happened. It's kind of historic. But think about what happened after all of that happened. We had a count, we had a recount, and then they wanted to keep recounting, and the Supreme Court finally stopped the additional recounts. It wasn't that they stopped the counting of ballots. They stopped the recount because they were chads and they were falling out and people were losing faith in the process. But we had transparency, we had verification through the recounts, and then we had remedies through the court process. And so when it was all said and done, it was Al Gore himself that sat there in the Senate chamber as vice president at the time, because when Gore was running against Bush, he was vice president under Bill Clinton. Bush was governor of Texas. And so when all of that was counted in January, it was actually Al Gore sitting there opening the electoral ballots. And there were some that continued to try to object. And even Al Gore himself said, no, stop, the race is over. We've had the recounts. And he put an end to all of the objections. That's what happens when you have transparency, verification, and remedies. Well, my third example is not a good one. It's what's happening right now, what's been happening in the 2020 election. It's been anything but transparency. They're boarding up windows, kicking the other side out, ignoring court orders on how the election should take place, ignoring court orders on allowing both sides to watch, continuing to count after one side goes home. I mean, look, folks, even if you aren't cheating, you have created the perception that you are cheating. Okay, that's just where this thing stands. So let's just not forget the magic formula again. And if this is applied in 2020, we'll have a calming effect after it's all over. Transparency, verification, and remedies for any violations of the law. Here's the deal with 2020. There's really two main issues. There's the fraud or potential fraud. I think anybody that looks at the stats and looks at all the things that have happened, the affidavits, the testimony, there's clearly fraud. The question is there enough fraud to overturn the election? Okay, I'm not going to get into the fraud issue today. The second issue is the bigger issue in my opinion. It's the unconstitutional, illegal changing of the rules at the last minute by people who had no authority to do so. That's a big deal. You change the rules in the middle of an election. You blame it on the pandemic. There's no constitutional power for a pandemic change to the elections. So I want to talk about the changes that were made. This video is not going to be about the fraud. I want to focus on the election clauses in the Constitution. That's what we're going to study today. And I'm going to hit 3 clauses for you today. I think it'll answer a lot of the questions we've been getting. Believe me, we're getting a flood of questions out there. And after you watch this video, I promise you, you're going to know more about the Constitution and elections than 99% of America, and you're going to know more than 100% of the media, the pundits out there. All right, so here's the 3 clauses we're going to cover. Number 1, we're going to cover Article 1, Section 4. That's where the state legislatures set the time, place, and manner of the election. Second clause we're going to cover is Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 2, and that's where the electors from each state are appointed in the manner that the legislature, the state legislature, decides. If you notice, the state legislatures have a lot of power, as the Founding Fathers believed they should, and as I believe they should. The third section of the Constitution we're going to cover is Section 4 of the 12th Amendment, which deals with a situation where you don't have a majority of electoral votes, and that's where state delegations in the U.S. House will decide. So we'll cover that as well. So that's the 3 things we're going to cover. Let's start real quick with Article 1, Section 4. Let me just read it to you. This is, of course, the Constitution Alive workbook, which includes the Constitution Made Easy. Here's what it says. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, so in other words, federal elections, shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Now, this part is really not an issue today, but it also says, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. So bottom line is states set election law, even federal elections, unless the Congress has amended that. And they've done that in terms of setting the date for the national election occurring every year in November. But let's look at states, okay? There's a reason that state legislatures have an elections committee. I mean, they debate this stuff all the time. Every legislative session in every state, there's bills filed to modify how we do elections. And if you remember your Schoolhouse Rocks on Saturday morning, how a bill becomes a law. The legislature makes that bill, proposes that bill, passes that bill, and makes that law. The governor's only say is to veto or sign that law, all right? The governor doesn't get to make up election law on his own or her own. And so legislators every year in their legislative sessions debate election law, and they make modifications, they tweak it, they sometimes change the absentee balloting or the dates of the election, how much early voting are we going to have, how votes are going to be counted. All of that is done by the legislature, and that is critical. It's important long term because that's where you want the power to be, at the state level in the legislature. And it's important in this election because it could very well come down to that question of who makes the rules for how these elections occurred in these very close states. What's happened this year in 2020 is just like with the COVID crackdowns. These governors have acted like dictators. The governor of California and New York, the governor of Texas. I mean, a lot of these governors have acted like absolute emperors, rewriting law, making up law, creating rules, telling you what you can or can't do, with no legislature actually saying that's what we want to have happen in most of these states. And then on the election side, the governors have done the same thing, and some of these secretaries of state have done the same thing. They've acted like emperors with our election law. They've changed it on a whim, completely violating the statutes that have been put into place by the legislature itself. In fact, I've been on lawsuits against the governor of Texas for this very reason. He changed election law without the state legislature saying that it was okay. They've been mailing ballots to everybody. They've been doing drive-through voting, changing election dates, all of that across the country, these different changes, absolutely, positively, 100% illegal, unconstitutional. And it's thrown the whole process into question. Now, let me just quick kind of a side trail on this, on who should be making these changes. If you think COVID is such a bad deal that nobody can go vote in person or most people can and we need to have more mail-in ballots or whatever, fine. The legislature had plenty of time to do that in every state. COVID did not start in September. It started back in March, right? And so there's all the legislatures across the country could have come together, any legislature, and made changes to their election law or refused changes that the governor was proposing, which is what happened in Pennsylvania. But when the governor or the secretary of state decides to change those laws on their own, this is the best analogy I can come up with, it's kind of like in baseball. You got two teams on the field and you got umpires there to call the balls and strikes, to call the outs. And it would be as if one of the teams has a guy on first base and he wants to run to second base and steal second base. But if he just takes off and runs, they're going to throw the ball to second base and they're going to tag him and he's going to be out, right? He's got to wait for stealing second base when the pitcher's not looking, or he's got to wait for the guy at the plate to get a base hit or at least put the ball in play or whatever. But let's say the first base coach leans over to the guy on first base and says, hey, you know those rules that say the second baseman can't tag you when you go to second base? Forget it. I'm changing that rule right now. You go ahead and go to second base and you're going to count. He's not going to be able to tag you. So he runs to second base. Second baseman is throwing the ball, tags the runner. Runner stands on second base and says, nope, you can't call me out. The rules were changed by the first base coach. Well, everybody's going to look at him and say, you got to be crazy. But what if the umpire on the field, instead of saying, you got to be crazy, says, it sounds like a pretty good deal because, COVID. So we're going to change it right here, right now. So not only did the first base coach decide unilaterally to change the rules for both sides, even though he's clearly on one side, but the umpire that was supposed to prevent that from happening said, yeah, because of COVID, I'm going to let you do that. Well, that's what happened in Pennsylvania. Governor and Secretary of State changed the rules to benefit their team, and then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, supposed to be the umpire in this case, said, yeah, we like your rules because, frankly, they're Democrats too, so they're really on the same team, and so they let that happen. So what happens in baseball when something crazy like that would happen? Well, the team that this has been done against would protest the game. They would protest. They might finish the game, but then that's going to be challenged up to the higher sources. In this case, it's Major League Baseball, and the commissioner or the vice commissioner is going to make a decision on that, or the league presidents would make a decision on that. Well, take that analogy to what we're dealing with right now. That's why in the middle of the game, the first base coach, the Pennsylvania governor, changed the rules for his team. The play went forward. The umpires, the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court said, oh, that's fine. Let him have second base. Forget those rules that we've played by forever and that were made by Major League Baseball. And so the other team, the Trump team, said, well, we're going to protest this game. And they did that, and they filed suit even as this was happening during the election in October and early November. And that preserved their objection in many ways, but it also allowed this process to take place, but the game to be finished. The game was finished, and now those things are in the courts and in the legislature, and they're being challenged, and rightfully so. I believe those decisions will be made at the Supreme Court. First, they're going to be made in those state legislatures, because similar things happened in Michigan, Wisconsin, all over the country. And so those are all being challenged, and there's going to be decisions made by the state legislators, who are the authority in this case, to say, hey, you broke the rules that we gave you, and then also decisions made at the Supreme Court level. Okay, that brings me to my second area of the Constitution because it's going to be important to understand where we go from here. In Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution, the electors, the people that actually choose president, the Constitution says that they are appointed by, or the process for appointing them is decided by the legislature. Okay, so here's Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 2, and here's how it reads, and this is what's going to be debated at the Supreme Court level. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the governor and secretary. Nope, doesn't say that. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. A number of electors goes on to explain the Electoral College and how it works. So who has the power to choose how the electors are going to be chosen? The state legislature. And the Supreme Court's already acknowledged this. In Bush v. Gore back in 2000, they specifically said the legislature has the power to choose how the electors will be chosen, and they could change that at any time. In fact, they quoted from a previous Supreme Court decision called McPherson v. Blacker. And here's what it said. I'll actually read that decision to you. Let me get it pulled up here. It says that the state legislature's power to select the manner for anointing in some cases it seems like, for appointing electors is plenary. It may, if it so chooses, select the electors itself, which indeed was the manner used by state legislatures in several states for many years after the framing of the Constitution. When the state legislature vests the right to vote for president in its people, so in other words, they changed it from choosing it ourselves to allowing the people to choose, it can take that power back to appoint electors. There's no doubt of the right of the legislature to resume the power at any time. Wow. Let that sink in for a minute, folks. That means that the legislatures in these questionable states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona, they could, in any of these states, North Carolina, I knew there was 7 that were in question. In any of these states, they could say, you know what, this election has been a debacle. It's a disaster. The well's been poisoned. We can't fix it. So we're going to choose the electors ourselves. We're going to make sure that we have electors representing our state in this election. Now take those two pieces of the Constitution and combine them. Think about the duty of state legislators here. Here's what should happen constitutionally moving forward with the 2020 election. First of all, any of the unconstitutional, illegal changing of the rules has to be reversed. That cannot go forward. If you allow it to go forward, you're encouraging lawlessness. You're encouraging governors and secretaries of state to ignore the law in their state and ignore the Constitution. So that's got to be reversed in every state where it happened. And any ballots that were cast or received under those illegal schemes must be excluded. So in the Pennsylvania example, it was allowing for votes to be mailed in after the election and be counted, even if they were received after the election, even if they didn't have a postmark. I mean, all these ridiculous exceptions that the legislature never would have passed. So what has to happen is all of those ballots that cannot be counted under actual state law, but are being counted under these new rules that the first base coach came up with, all of those ballots have to be excluded. They can't be counted, okay? That's number one, and that's what the legislatures are right now investigating in many of these states, and I think they will do so in all of the states. Here's the problem. The next step is, what if the ballots that should be excluded because they were illegally cast, what if they've been mixed in with the other ballots? What if there's no way to tell which are which and we can't separate them? Or another scenario to think about while we're doing that, what if all of those people that voted thought they were voting legally? Now we're going to disenfranchise them? Now we're potentially going to violate the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. We're going to violate the guaranteed right to vote in the 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendment. I mean, you got real problems even with separating those ballots and throwing them out. You're disenfranchising those people. So I think that hurts the Democrats more than it hurts the Republicans, but I think it's a constitutional problem. So if the ballots have been mixed and poisoned the well and you can't separate them, or if you address the situation of even if we can separate them, how do we still do this election and disenfranchise all those people? Then you go to the next step that has to be taken, the remedies that could be taken in each of these states. And here's what they are. Number one, you possibly have to redo the election. The legislature could call for a redo of the election. The Supreme Court could look at this and say, The well has been poisoned in that state. We have to have a redo of the election. Now, don't think that's far-fetched, folks. We just did that last year. I mean, I'm not talking about 200 years ago. I'm going to give you some examples from a long time. But we just did that last year. A federal election for Congress had to be redone in North Carolina. Guess why? Mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, harvesting, Republicans and Democrats both. All right? So a redo is not that far-fetched. It could be done. Now, I think that may actually be the most proper way to deal with this once they find it. They've got to do it. They've got to do it quick. And at least if they do it now, I mean, everybody's going to be watching. There'll be transparency, and people will have confidence in the outcome. That is a constitutional outcome that could happen and would be fair. The Supreme Court or the state legislature could invalidate that particular state's election and say, we don't have time to do a redo, so that state's just not going to get to count. The Supreme Court could do that, could literally throw out that state's electoral votes, and you just reduce the number of the Electoral College. It makes it more likely that nobody gets a majority. It makes it more, there's some couple of scenarios, depending on which state gets thrown out, that we have a tie. There's a potential for having a tie right now, even if all states count. So look, that throws us into that last part of the Constitution I'm going to cover, which is the 12th Amendment. But before I do that, let's just reiterate, the state legislatures have solutions here under the Constitution. Invalidate the election, have a redo of the election, or appoint the electors themselves. I fully realize appointing their own electoral slate could become, I mean, that would create a lot of angst in our nation. But it would be constitutional. And this type of outcome is not unheard of. Let me just point out that in 1876, which is what this election's starting to feel a lot more like, you had a very similar scenario to what we're facing right now. You had 3 states that actually sent 2 sets of electors. So you had a set that was sent by an election official and another set sent by another election official or by the legislature or by the governor. That happened in 1876. And those 3 states had their 19 electoral votes thrown into question. And 1 Oregon vote was thrown into question based on how they had sent theirs in. So there was actually 20 electoral votes that were kind of set aside and put into question. And Samuel Tilden, the Democrat nominee for president, was 1 vote shy of winning. He was almost there. Any one of those 20 votes would have given him the presidency. 1 vote shy. Rutherford B. Hayes was 20 votes shy, and so nobody had a majority of the Electoral College, and you had this controversy over which set of electors do we adopt. Now, their solution, I don't think, is where we're going to go this time. They actually created a commission. Congress passed a law to create this commission. It had 5 House members, 5 Senate members, and 5 Supreme Court justices. It took weeks. They investigated everything, and ultimately they gave all 20 of those electoral votes to Rutherford B. Hayes, and he ended up winning the presidency based on that. Now, I don't think that's where we're headed. I don't think that's what they would do, but you know what? The Supreme Court may have to decide which slate of electors, if we have 2 slates from states, are going to be counted, or the Supreme Court may say we're going to have a redo, or may throw out a state altogether. There's a lot of scenarios here that could throw us into a 12th Amendment solution. And that's why I want to cover this third part, and then we'll be done with our constitutional analysis for the day. Article 2 already kind of had a provision for what you do if nobody gets a electoral majority, or if there's a tie, and that same kind of process is carried over into the 12th Amendment and then kind of fine-tuned a little bit. And this has happened. This is not new. There's precedent for this. It happened twice. It happened in 1824 and in 1836. And here's how it happened. Here's how it works. If there is a tie in the Electoral College, or nobody gets to 270, then the state congressional delegations will choose the president. And I say it that way because some people say the House will decide. Well, that doesn't mean that 435 members of the House just vote for who the president's going to be and Nancy Pelosi or whoever would be president. No, they actually vote by states. Each state sits together and comes up with a decision on who they're voting for president. And then whoever gets 26 or more of those states becomes president. So the vote is by state. It must be 26 or more. And it just so happens that the Republicans have 26 states for sure, and they may end up with 29 depending on after all the counting. There's no way they're going to go under 26 based on the makeup of the congressional elections, but it's possible they could go up to 29. So that's how the president will be chosen. It will be chosen by the states individually voting, 1 state at a time voting, and whoever gets 26 will win. Had an interesting question the other night on one of my Facebook Lives. So thank you, Monty, for this question if you're watching this video. And that is, what if a state has a split delegation? Well, the only precedent we have for that is that they would actually just be considered divided, and it wouldn't even count. So it wouldn't be counted as yes or no for either side. So you got to get to 26 without a divided state. It doesn't look like there's going to be enough any divided states that would be needed for the Republicans to still get to 26. So all of that to say, if there's a tie or there's less than 270, it's going to the state delegations, and Donald Trump would be president under that scenario. You say, well, what about vice president? Well, vice president goes to the Senate. So president goes to the House, or the state delegations of the House. Vice president goes to the Senate and is chosen by a majority of the Senate. Now, let me just give you something to ponder. If the two Georgia runoffs go to the Democrats, we will have a 50-50 tie in the Senate. And that means that if we ended up in this scenario where nobody won the Electoral College, you would have a Senate sit down with a 50-50 tie voting for vice president, and the vice president of the United States is Mike Pence. Mike Pence is going to choose between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris. Who do you think he's going to choose? That means he becomes vice president again by breaking his own tie. I mean, that's the Article 1, Section 3. Vice president breaks the tie in the Senate when there is a tie. That's never happened. There might be some that say, no, he doesn't have that role in this particular case. I think constitutionally he does, but that's never been challenged. Okay, that's a lot of constitutional information, a lot of clauses in the Constitution to consider, but there are constitutional solutions for most all of these scenarios. There's some that have never happened, and there would have to be some decisions made by Congress and the U.S. Supreme Court. But here's the important thing. You might be saying at this point, Rick, okay, great. It's all kind of interesting. The history's interesting. But what do I do with all this? Maybe that stuff's important to know, but what do I do as a citizen? So let me close with action steps for us as citizens. We don't sit on the Supreme Court. We don't sit necessarily, maybe some of those legislators that are friends in some of these close states are watching this, but most of us are not going to be the decision makers here. We're not going to be doing the investigation in the state legislature of Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan. We're not going to be sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court making a decision in these cases. So what do we do? Here's what we do. The same thing we would have done if this was decided on election night. We stay in the fight. Number one, you need to take encouragement from the fact that the Constitution is on the comeback. Be encouraged by the fact that people are talking about the Constitution, that we're looking at these provisions, that people are signing up for our Constitution classes. The largest Constitution classes in history are taking place in our live Constitution classes right now every week. People are signing up to be Constitution coaches and host classes in their living rooms, at their churches, and their communities all over the country. We're over 3,500 Constitution coaches right now. We have 11,000 people signed up for our weekly Constitution class that we're doing. It's just unbelievable, and it's growing like crazy, and you can be a part of that. The Constitution's on the comeback, so start doing the same things I would have asked you to do if the election was a blowout on election night for either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Our duty as citizens doesn't change under any of those scenarios. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Number one, host a Constitution class. Start studying it yourself, but invite other people to do the same thing. Sign up at constitutioncoach.com. Right now, as you're watching this video, go into your browser, type in constitutioncoach.com, click on it, sign up, become a Constitution coach, and start. You don't have to know the answer to any of these questions to be a Constitution coach. You just get the people in the room, and then our videos will answer the questions. Your job is to bring your fellow citizens together. constitutioncoach.com. Get in there right now. And then secondly, join us for a constitutional defense course. All right, that's an opportunity to spend time with us in person where I'm going to teach you the intellectual ammunition on how to defend the Constitution. But then you're also going to learn the physical training to defend your family with a firearm. You'll learn how to safely and effectively carry that firearm legally and use it effectively to save your family should you end up in a situation where that is needed. We have a great time together. It's wonderful fellowship together. It's kind of a safe haven right now when you come with us to this class. It feels like life is back to normal. You get to be around a bunch of other patriots from across the country, and you get to learn a lot of great things. So join us at a constitutional defense course very soon. We've only got one left this year before the year's over, December 13th, and you got to sign up for that one quick. And then we also have courses in the spring. So sign up to be a Constitution coach. Join us on a constitutional defense course. Third, start looking at local races in your community that are going to be coming up in the next few months. City council, school board, water district, whatever it might be. and you consider running for office, or at least recruit someone else in your church or your family to run for those local offices. And let's take back 10,000 Supreme Court seats and city council seats across the country this year. Last thing I'll ask you to do is share this video. We've been, Facebook has shut us down from boosting and posting and all this stuff. It's just ridiculous what they're doing to censor us and other patriots across the country. So the only way that we can get the word out is through you. So please share this video, send it to your friends and family, watch it with your friends and family, get people educated on these things. Friends, our system does work. I know you're questioning that right now. You're wondering if the Constitution has blown it, if our system doesn't. No, our system works, but we have to work it. We, the citizens, we have to save our Constitution from those who believe that the end justifies the means. We who believe in biblical values and truth and right and wrong and moral absolutes, we have to prevent our system from being hijacked from that Machiavellian viewpoint that says you do whatever it costs to win, do whatever it takes to win. You win at all cost. There is no right or wrong, it's just winning. That's the mindset right now that too many people in America have, and we can't buy into that. We have to bring back a respect for truth and justice. We the people, we must do our job. We've got to be the patriotic, responsible, biblical citizens and do our duty under the Constitution and under the Bible. Jesus told us to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. You are Caesar in America. We the people. So you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's by doing your job as a citizen. We the people doing our jobs to save the Constitution. Jesus tells the parable of the talents, and you have the two servants who worked those talents and used them and multiplied them, and then the one that buried the talent and did nothing with it. The talent I'm talking about today is freedom. You've been given a free system, a government that you're in charge of. And if you bury that and you don't participate, well, you're that wicked and slothful servant that did nothing. Let's not be that one. Let's be one of the other two that works the system, that uses our freedom, that engages in the process, and let's do it effectively. That's what we're all about at Constitution Coach. That's what we do, is we train you to effectively live out your freedom. Basically to live out Colossians 3:23. Everything we do it the best that we can as unto God, not unto men. I'm asking you to be a citizen that does your citizenship to the best of your ability. Everything we do, the best that we can as unto God, not unto men. And we will train you to do that. That's what Constitution Coach is all about. Have joy, friends. Don't be down and out. Don't be depressed. Don't be one of those. Be like Ronald Reagan said, happy warriors out to take back a country and a world to freedom. That's us. We are happy warriors. We're serious and we're effective and we fight hard, tooth and nail to win, right? We're going to fight hard. We're going to do our best, but we can be joyful at the same time. Happy warriors out to take back a country and a world to freedom. I'm Rick Green. This has been today's Constitutional Minute.